Wife falsely accused me of cheating and got married 3 months after our divorce. My parents not only believed her, but also shunned me out of the family. I 40. To M was once married to a woman named Shannon. And to put it simply, she was crazy. She nearly destroyed my life and wrecked my reputation beyond repair. When I met her for the first time, my younger, more naive self thought Shannon was everything I ever wanted in a partner. We met on a blind date set up by mutual friends, and I was hooked. There was just something about her presence, the way she spoke, and how she carried herself, that pulled me in right from the start. However, as much as I was smitten with Shannon, it became clear early on that she didn't feel the same way about me. She was honest and upfront about her feelings, making it clear that she did not share the same romantic interest towards me. Though it stung, I respected her honesty. Over the months, even though Shannon wasn't interested in a romantic relationship with me, we continued to stay in touch. We moved in the same social circles, and would occasionally see each other at gatherings or parties hosted by our friends during these times. I made a conscious effort to keep things friendly between us. I treated her as I would any other acquaintance, always polite, always respectful, but never wanting to make her feel uncomfortable or pressured. I understood where she stood, and I made sure to honor that. Once we were both at a party, and Shannon had had a bit too much to drink. She was visibly intoxicated, and I could see that she needed help getting home. Without hesitation, I stepped in to assist her. I called a cab, helped her get inside safely, and made sure she was taken care of. She thanked me later for taking care of her in such a vulnerable state, and not taking advantage of her. I think this might have been when she started to warm up to me a bit. After months of staying friends, something unexpected happened that changed everything between us. I had an upcoming work party and not really having a date. I casually asked our friend group if anyone would be interested in going with me. It wasn't a big deal, just an opportunity for some free food, drinks, and a bit of fun. I didn't want to be without a date for the evening, since most of my coworkers were either married or had a partner. To my surprise, Shannon reached out to me and said she'd love to join. I was a bit taken aback, but happy to have her company. So, we made plans for the night. When the night of the party arrived, I picked her up and we headed out together. From the start, things felt different. There was an ease between us, a comfort that hadn't been there before. She seemed more open around me. I did my best to keep things light and respectful, avoiding any flirtation since I was still mindful of her previous feelings. But despite my efforts, the night was filled with laughter and genuine enjoyment. Shannon seemed to be having a great time. She was laughing and giggling, and it felt like we were really connecting on a deeper level. As the night drew to a close and I drove her back home, Shannon invited me back to her place. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I wanted to be sure that whatever happens next between us was genuine and not just a spur-of-the-moment decision fueled by the atmosphere of the night. So I politely declined her invitation and left. The very next day, I received a text from Shannon. She told me that over the past few weeks, she had slowly started to fall for me but was afraid to admit it. She said that my consistent kindness, the way I'd always treated her with respect, and my gentlemanly behavior had made her see me in a different light. Shannon admitted that she regretted rejecting me after our first date, and that she wished she had given me a real chance to get to know me better. Back then, she asked if I could consider giving her another chance. Now that she realized how she truly felt, it was a lot to take in, since this was also unexpected. Despite the months of just being friends, my feelings for Shannon had never really changed. So, when she asked if I could give her another chance, I readily agreed, and that's how we ended up going out for another date. From that point on, things between us just fell into place. What started as an unexpected second chance turned into a more serious relationship. I fell head over heels for Shannon, and would have given her the moon if I could. After dating for a year and a half, Shannon and I made the decision to move in together. At that point, we had already been spending most of our time at each other's places, and when both of our leases were up, we thought it made sense to find a place that we could truly call our own. However, the process of finding that place revealed some things about Shannon that I hadn't fully acknowledged before. From the very start, Shannon always had a tendency to be a bit showy, always gravitating toward the finer things in life, which is completely opposite of who I am essentially. It wasn't something that I had minded too much before, but it became very apparent when we started apartment hunting. She had her heart set on high-end places, luxurious apartments only that were honestly out of her budget. When I pointed this out to her, she argued how she expected me to cover 70% of the rent because I had a higher-paying job anyways. Looking back now, I realized this should have been the first red flag for me, a sign that our financial expectations and priorities did not align. But at the time, I was deeply in love with Shannon and I wanted to make her happy. So I didn't push back. Once we found an apartment and finally moved in together, another issue surfaced. Shannon was very particular about how she wanted our new place to look. When I started bringing over my furniture, she immediately dismissed most of it, calling it tacky and cheap, and asked me to just throw them out. I do admit my furniture was more on the traditional vintage side. Pieces I had collected over the years and had grown attached to. Shannon was insistent, and the more we discussed it, the more I realized that she wasn't going to compromise easily. In the end, I gave in just to keep the peace. We moved most of my furniture into my study room or the storage, where she wouldn't have to see it every day. This made me realize that Shannon was extremely controlling in our relationship, something I had occasionally brushed off in the past. Despite some of her flaws, my ex-wife had a way of making people feel valued and cared for, and that included my parents. From the very beginning, Shannon went out of her way to build a strong relationship with them, and they absolutely adored her. In return, for context, Shannon had no contact with her own family. She had explained to me very early on that her relationship with her father was deeply painful. After her mother passed away, her father turned to alcohol and spent most nights out at bars, leaving Shannon to deal with the aftermath. As a result, when she left for college, she made the difficult decision to cut off all contact with him. Shannon's father never made any effort to reach out to her. This had always left a void in her heart, a longing for the kind of love and support she never received from her own family. That's why she had become so close to my parents. They filled that space for her. My mom and dad always welcomed her with open arms, offering the love and care that she had missed out on for so long. In many ways, they became the family she had always wanted but never had, and I didn't mind sharing my parents with her at all. I wish I had seen back then how she was manipulating my parents, slowly turning them against me, but I was too foolish to notice. After 3 years of dating, I proposed to Shannon. We had been talking about marriage for a while, and Shannon had expressed her desire to start a family soon. I spent weeks carefully choosing a ring that I knew she would love, and I planned the proposal at her favorite restaurant, a place that held special memories for us both. The night of the proposal was magical. When I asked Shannon to marry me, she said yes without hesitation. The joy in her voice, the tears in her eyes, and the way she hugged me tightly made me feel like the happiest man alive. As we began planning the wedding, it became clear that Shannon didn't have a lot of savings. She was still paying off for student loans. So, my parents and I ended up covering almost 90% of the wedding expenses. It didn't bother me much, since I wanted to give Shannon the beautiful wedding she had always dreamed of. Our wedding day itself was wonderful. Everything went smoothly, and as we exchanged vows, I was excited to be married to her. But it was after the wedding that the real trouble began. The first major issue we faced was when we couldn't seem to get pregnant. We tried for months, hoping each time that we would finally see that positive result, but it never came. Eventually, we decided to seek medical advice, and this was when the doctors discovered that Shannon had a condition with her uterus that made it nearly impossible for us to conceive naturally. This news crushed her. She had always wanted to be a mother, and the idea that she might never experience pregnancy was incredibly painful for her. As a result, Shannon fell into a deep depression after the diagnosis. I did my best to support her, even suggesting that we could explore other options, like adoption or even surrogacy, but she wasn't interested. Shannon was fixated on the idea of having her own biological child, and any other option felt like a compromise she wasn't willing to make. Next, over the months, Shannon began to expect me to cover her share of the rent and bills. Entirely, she insisted that, as the man in the relationship, it was my responsibility to take care of her needs. Throughout our entire relationship, I'd always been the one to pay for our dates, vacations, and the majority of our rent and bills. I didn't mind doing these things, because I loved her and wanted to provide for her. But I also believed in a partnership, where both working adults contributed. Shannon earned a decent salary, and I couldn't understand why she suddenly felt entitled to stop contributing altogether to our shared expenses. I knew I couldn't sustain our lifestyle on my own. So I put my foot down and told her that if she wasn't willing to continue paying her share, we would have to break our lease and move into a much smaller, less expensive apartment. I knew how much she valued appearances, and that she wouldn't want her friends to think we were poor. So I hoped this would push her to see reason. Begrudgingly, she agreed to keep paying her rent share only. However, over the next few months, she would constantly mention how her male coworkers took care of their wives and children, and that those women never had to worry about a job or a salary. I tried to argue that those women had children to care for, so it made sense for them to stay at home. However, she was a functioning adult who had a decent job. It made no sense for her to just give up on her career and sit at home all day. Shannon was pushy, and when I was still not getting convinced, she decided to go involve my mother in this disagreement. She complained to my mom, almost like a child running to a parent when things didn't go her way. My mom, who had always been traditional in her views on marriage, took Shannon's side without hesitation. She told me that Shannon's thinking wasn't wrong, in that as her husband it was my duty to take care of all her needs. If she wanted to leave her job, My mother's words stung. She didn't understand the financial strain it would place on me if Shannon stopped contributing altogether. I had a huge fight with Shannon regarding this, as I felt she betrayed me by involving my parents in our issues. During this fight, in her anger, she admitted for the first time how she regretted marrying me, as I was not able to support her. This is when I started to suspect that Shannon might be nothing more than a gold digger. I had thought we were partners in this marriage, but it was clear that she was only interested in what I could provide, not who I was. After that fight, Shannon began to ignore me completely at home, withholding affection in every way possible, almost as if she was punishing me for standing my ground. There were no more date nights, no intimacy, not even the simple gesture of holding hands. She stopped helping around the house, leaving all the responsibilities to me, as if she was trying to force my hand to give in to her demands. At first, I kept trying to talk to her to find a way to come to a compromise, but she would ignore all my effort. Hence, after a while, I just got tired. I felt mentally exhausted from trying to mend something that she seemed determined to break. Instead, I slowly watched as the distance between us grew wider and wider. Then the very next month, Shannon quit her job out of nowhere, without even discussing it with me first. I was starting to get really frustrated with her antics, and firmly warned her that if she didn't find a new job soon, I would move out because I couldn't sustain our lifestyle all alone. She eventually broke down in tears, expressing how much she despised working, and that she just wanted a blissful married life, where she could stay at home and be a good wife to me. Seeing her cry made me feel a bit guilty, so I reluctantly agreed to let her take a temporary break from working. I pointed out to her that if she expected me to cover all the expenses, she would need to take on all the household responsibilities. She agreed without hesitation. Unfortunately, as you can already guess, she never stayed true to her words. Shannon began to spend her days either gaming or lounging in bed, watching movies, just like I knew she would. She would occasionally clean up around the house, but I continued to handle most of the household duties myself, just like I used to do before. Whenever I pointed out that she wasn't fulfilling her end of the agreement, she would get annoyed and accuse me of nagging her. As time passed, Shannon became more and more distant. She immersed herself in her gaming community, spending hours every day talking to people online. It wasn't long before I realized that these online friends were taking up more of her time and attention than I was, even when we were in the same room. Her phone was always in her hand, her eyes glued to the screen, her fingers tapping out messages faster than I could keep track of. I'd catch glimpses of her smiling or laughing at something someone had said, and it was like a punch to the gut every time. That smile, that laugh. It used to be for me, but now she ignored me like I didn't exist. During this time, the financial strain on me was becoming unbearable. Not only was I paying for everything, but I was also dipping into my savings just to keep us afloat. Every paycheck seemed to vanish as soon as it hit the bank. I was constantly stressed, constantly worried about what would happen if something went wrong, if I lost my job, or if we had some kind of emergency. There was no safety net, no backup plan. Just me trying to keep us from drowning. My parents didn't offer any help, not even a word of advice or a shoulder to lean on. They knew about our situation, and knew the kind of pressure I was under, but they just didn't care. Then one day, I discovered something that shattered whatever was left of my marriage. I was going through both my and Shannon's phone bill, making sure everything looked right. However, as I skimmed through the charges and the call logs, I noticed there were multiple calls made to the same number. On Shannon's account, I found it odd. So, without thinking, I asked Shannon whose number it was. She just rolled her eyes at me and told me that it belonged to a guy she had met online. I asked her if they were close friends or something more, since she seemed to be talking to him all the time. To this, Shannon nonchalantly replied, maybe. Maybe not, he would definitely want us to be something more. My jaw dropped as I stared at her, half expecting her to say this was just a joke. This was when Shannon continued to tell me she did feel emotionally attracted to Jacob, and liked spending time with him. My hands started to shake hearing her words. I grabbed her phone and scrolled through her messages, just to see for myself if this was really true. What I saw made me sick to my stomach. Shannon and the man had exchanged very graphic messages with each other, and discussed everything about their lives in detail. At one point, she had even openly admitted to Jacob that she had fallen out of love with me, but that she liked to use me as a cash cow since I was a safe option. She boasted about how she was living a comfortable life at home, without ever having to lift a single finger. For the past few months, Jacob, in turn, had called me a foolish, nerdy guy who deserved to serve her. The sheer audacity of their conversation left me stunned. I quickly took photos of their messages, as I couldn't believe what I was reading. Shannon looked at me like she just didn't care. I realized then that our marriage was over. To her, I was nothing more than a means to an end, a tool to be used and discarded once I had outlived my usefulness. Although I was devastated, I knew what I had to do next. I told her that I was done living my life like this, and that I was going to divorce her. She laughed at my face and told me that divorce was not an option, and had the audacity to suggest that we could open our marriage if that would make things easier for me to accept. I refused outright and demanded that she move out immediately, since I was the one paying for everything. That's when her demeanor changed. Shannon wasn't going to just easily give up her grip on me. She had controlled and manipulated me for so long that she thought, even after finding out about her affair, I would foolishly forgive her and give in to her demands yet again. However, when I didn't, she started to yell at me that she was never going to go anywhere and threatened to involve my parents. She called them crying and begging them for help, as if I was wrong for asking her for a divorce. Instead of admitting that she had been cheating, she started to tell my parents how it was me who had been unfaithful, just like she had always suspected. Apparently she claimed that she had caught me cheating, and that I was now trying to make things up about her life and kick her out of the house. She begged my parents to help her out. My foolish mother in particular was quick to believe her story. She called me in tears, furious, accusing me of breaking my vows and betraying my poor wife, who had been nothing but kind to me and my family. My dad also scolded me for letting down such a great woman like Shannon and how disappointed he was in me. I tried to argue that I had never even cheated on her, but they did not listen and continued to bash me. Confused, I asked them why they would believe her over their own son. That's when I found out that for months, Shannon had been feeding my parents stories, claiming I'd been coming home late, that she had found a lipstick mark on my shirt, that I constantly talked about one of my female coworkers, and that I was always distracted by my phone texting with someone. I was stunned by how far Shannon had gone, laying the groundwork for months to create this narrative. She had clearly planned ahead, knowing I would eventually discover her affair, and wanted my parents to take her side and isolate me. No matter how much I tried to explain to my parents, I had been nothing but loyal, that Shannon was the one who had manipulated them. In the entire situation, they refused to listen. I even sent them the proof I had of Shannon cheating on me. But my mom insisted that I was probably making this all up, to cover my tracks just like Shannon had warned them, while my dad blamed me for failing as a husband in my marriage. In their eyes, Shannon was the victim and I was the villain no matter what. They just couldn't comprehend the idea that a woman, especially one like Shannon, could ever be unfaithful. Long story short, despite all of Shannon's manipulations and the chaos she caused, we did end up getting divorced. The process wasn't easy. Shannon fought me every step of the way, trying to twist the situation to her advantage, but thankfully I had a solid lawyer, who managed to gather all the evidence of her infidelity, and present it in court. The judge saw the truth, and because of that, I didn't have to pay her a single cent in alimony. But even with the divorce finalized, the damage my ex-wife had caused in my life was far from over. Despite the fact that the court had acknowledged Shannon's affair, and it was crystal clear Shannon had been the one to betray our marriage, my parents still clung to her version of the events. It was like they were living in a completely different reality. They started to insist after the divorce that I must have done something to push Shannon into the arms of another man, and that there had to be more to the story. As a result, my relationship with my parents suffered. We grew further and further apart. Every conversation with them turned into an argument. Every family gathering was a reminder that they didn't believe in me. They basically shunned me out of the family, and I felt incredibly isolated after the divorce. Throughout all this, Shannon continued to stay in touch with my parents. Even after our divorce was finalized, that vile woman continued to use my parents to keep a foothold in my life. Just 3 months after our divorce, Shannon had no hesitation in announcing her engagement, an upcoming wedding to the same man she had cheated on me with. I was floored by how cruel she could be. However, what hurt even more was learning that my mother had decided to attend her wedding, despite knowing everything. When I reached out to her to ask why, she grew frustrated, insisting that she just wanted to be there for Shannon. She explained that my ex-wife, who has no family, had personally asked her to attend, and my mom felt obligated to go and support her. It was incredibly difficult to accept that my own mother had chosen to support the very person who had torn my life apart. In the aftermath, I turned to therapy to help me grapple with my emotions. It took months and years to start healing from everything that had happened. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I didn't think I'd ever fully recover. But with time I began to find peace. Slowly I began to rebuild my life, to understand that what happened wasn't my fault, and to let go of the anger that was eating away at me. Currently I am in a much better place in life. I've moved on, landed a better job, paid off all my debts, and relocated to a new area, which has been a breath of fresh air. I've also gone low contact with my parents, since our interactions are mostly negative, and it is very draining. As for Shannon, I no longer think about her, or what she might be up to. The pain and anger have been replaced by a sense of peace and closure. I've moved on completely, and I'm grateful for that. About a year and a half ago, I started dating a wonderful woman named Kylie. She's an incredible woman, gorgeous, honest, independent, and down to earth. From the very beginning, it was clear that we shared a lot of common interests and values. After my last failed relationship, I never thought I'd have another chance at love. But here I am. I'm incredibly grateful every day that Kylie came into my life and has redefined what a relationship means to me. She's inspired me to be a better man and loves me for who I am, without ever asking me to change. Just a month ago, Kylie and I received the most incredible news. We're expecting a baby the moment I found out. I was over the moon. The excitement was overwhelming. And it felt like the start of a new chapter in our lives that I had been dreaming of for so long. A week ago, I took the plunge and proposed to her. I got down on one knee, and when she said yes, I cried tears of joy. It felt like everything I'd been through in the past had finally led to this perfect moment. Since our engagement, Kylie and her sister have been excitedly planning our wedding. This morning I received a call from my mom, which was surprising since we hadn't been in touch for months. She hesitatingly asked if it was true that I was engaged, mentioning that her friends had sent her a picture Kylie had posted of us with her ring on social media announcing our engagement. I confirmed it then. She asked why I hadn't told her or my dad about this news directly, which made me scoff. I told her bluntly that, given how our relationship had deteriorated over the years, I didn't feel compelled to include them in my life significant moments anymore. My honesty seemed to upset her. She asked if they would be at least invited to the wedding, since people might talk if they weren't present. I laughed at the absurdity of her concern and told her that Kylie and I didn't really care about what others thought, and that honestly, I didn't want them to be there at all. Hearing this, she started to cuss me out for being such a selfish and ungrateful son. So, Reddit Ida, for not inviting my parents after the way they have behaved with me in the past. Update 1, answering some of your most asked questions here. No, my parents have never met Kylie, although they did know that we have been dating. However, not once did they make any initiative to meet Kylie, since they still blame me for my divorce from my ex-wife. As far as I know, my parents are still in contact with Shannon to this day. My ex-wife is a classic narcissist. She knows how to play on people's sympathies and craft a narrative that paints her in the best possible light. Ultimately, while it's disheartening to see my parents still involved with Shannon, I've come to accept that this is beyond my control. No one has any idea about Kylie's pregnancy yet, since we haven't told anyone. We are planning on telling people only after the wedding. The reason I don't want my parents present for the wedding is not just because of how they have blatantly favored my ex-wife, but also because I don't want them to sabotage my happy moment with my wife by bringing up the past. I don't trust them anymore and want them to stay away from my new family. Update 2, it's been a few days since my last update. Today, Kylie showed me a message she received on social media from my mother. It turns out my mom reached out to her and accused Kylie of alienating me from the rest of the family. In the message, she had written that Kylie doesn't deserve to be my wife because wives are supposed to bond families together, not break them apart. She also wrote how Shannon was always so close to her and dad after she came into my life, but Kylie has done the opposite and has even refused to ask for their blessings. I was furious when I saw the message. I called my mom immediately and asked her to stay out of my life. I reminded her that I was sick and tired of them always bringing up my ex-wife when she was nothing but a huge mistake. I told her how crazy she and dad were to have continued to support an outsider over their own son, even after everything. My mom argued that she couldn't help but always see Shannon as her own daughter and that she missed who I used to be before my divorce with Shannon. I pointed out to her that I used to be a foolish man in love, which is why I was taken advantage of by that wicked woman, and I was glad I was no longer that same person. My mom then went on to say that if I was really determined to marry Kylie, despite how much they disliked her, she and dad could consider giving us their blessings, but only if we invited them to our wedding first. I scoffed and told her I was done trying to explain myself over and over and made it clear that from this day forward, I would be cutting both her and dad out of my life permanently. I firmly informed her that she can continue to consider Shannon as her daughter for as long as she lives because I am no longer their son. My mom freaked out and tried to argue back, but I cut her off. Me and Kylie have since blocked my parents from all our socials and our phones. Update 3. It's been a month and a half since my last update. Kylie and I recently got married in an intimate ceremony, surrounded by our family and friends. My parents weren't invited, but Kylie's parents were there cheering us on. The wedding went off without a hitch and it was perfect. Right now I'm on my honeymoon with my wife, and we're planning to announce our pregnancy in a few weeks to our close family members and friends. Since blocking my parents, they haven't been able to contact us, and I'm at peace with that. I'm incredibly happy and grateful as I look forward to becoming a father. All I want now is to be there for my loving wife and to take care of our child.